Good. All right, so this presentation is about how veterans are adjusting to college. And the reason why I chose to study this topic is because it's something that has always been interesting to me when I was in my doctoral program, when I would see a lot of veterans coming directly, from combat situations into the classroom. And it's an area that really hasn't been studied a lot. And so basically the literature is saying there's not a lot of literature on it, so it was a nice area for me to start looking into. So what I decided to do is to establish a scale that measures how well veterans are adjusting to college. And the reason why the scale is helpful is because it can be used by veteran service officials and people that work in student affairs to help them. Hi, we're just getting started.
Oh, wonderful.
To help student affairs officials really get a temperature of how veterans are doing. Because colleges are doing a lot of things to support veterans on their campus because of the GI Bill money and because they are a unique population on the campus. I thought it would be excellent for student affairs people to be able to see, oh, this is how our students are doing and this is how they're connecting. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the tool and a little bit about some of the findings I discovered in my study. So my study involved 3 colleges across the country. I did my own home campus, which is Western Connecticut State University. And I also studied population at Southern Illinois University, which is the Midwest, and down south at Texas State University. So these are the demographics of our student sample. So the sample is relatively representative of the military population. Generally, student veteran populations in gender-wise is different than the military population in that more women seek education benefits than men do when you're looking at the percentages. So another thing you might notice here that's interesting is that there's a lot of upperclassmen, and that's because a lot of students will go to the community colleges for the first 2 years, and a lot of them have online credits and other credits from jumping around, depending on, when they're in and out of deployments and things like that. So a lot of the veterans that were surveyed in these 4-year universities were in upperclassmen, and some of them were graduate students. The mean number of months deployed of people in the sample, so the sampling was if they consider themselves a veteran, and so some people are veterans and they haven't necessarily been in combat, they've been deployed 6 months other places. So the average number of months deployed was 11 months, but for combat vets, the mean was 16.4. So that's on average. I also looked at some mental health indicators when I was looking at the population. And so these are some of the mean scores. So the VAC scale is the Veteran Adjustment to College scale, and the mean score for that was 43, so that when people are doing the scale, they know where the mean score is. The mean score of the PTSD scale, which I use the PTSD checklist, and then there's the mean for the depression. One of the things I looked at when I'm looking at the mental health indicators is, was there a correlation between the veteran adjustment to college and mental health? And what I found was that there was a medium to strong relationship between PTSD and veteran adjustment to college. So the higher the PTSD, the worse they were adjusting to college. One of the things that I thought was interesting about this relationship is, in general, veterans don't like to talk about mental health issues. They don't want to be seen as that having mental health issues. And if student affairs officials or veterans officials on campus can measure their adjustment to college, they don't necessarily have to measure their mental health stuff to see how they're doing. So it's a nice way of taking the temperature without really making the veterans feel uncomfortable that you're looking for mental health indicators. So that's that slide. So according to the cutoff score for PTSD, so when you take a scale for a mental health indicator, there's a cutoff score that says this is someone who has PTSD and higher, and then below it they do not have PTSD. And so in my sample of college students, 18.6% of them had diagnosable PTSD. And then the depression scores were, mild depression was 66.9. Now you have to keep in mind that the way that this scale works is pretty much everyone in this room would have mild depression, the way that it measures. So that's pretty much normative, the mild depression, because there's no, on that scale I use, there's no depression option. But there was a significant number of moderate to moderately severe people with depression. So I thought that was important to look at. And the bivariate correlations means these are the connections between all of these measures. So I also looked at student stress as well. There's not a cutoff for student stress, it just is high or low. And so if you look at the correlations between the VAC scale, which is the adjustment to college scale, and PTSD, it's moderately to high related to PTSD. It has some correlation with depression, and also it's related to student stress. So basically, what my scale does is the higher the mental health or the stress, the lower the adjustment to college. And so for me, when I'm developing an instrument, that says, okay, I'm in the right track. So this is how I developed the scale. I started with a focus group at Southern Connecticut State University, and I talked to a whole bunch of veterans, and I just asked the questions, what has been challenging for you in adjusting to college? And then I used this fancy concept mapping method. And then once I developed the questions from what those veterans told me, I had a panel of experts, which were largely veterans themselves who are working in student affairs. And they kind of helped me hone the questions down and word them properly. And then I tested and tested and tested and tested. And so I am going to skip over all the items in the scale because we're going to come back to them. So what we found that was most helpful to veterans when we said, what is the most helpful thing? I asked them this question outside of the scale, so it's basically a narrative, what did you find most helpful? And so the number one thing that they found, these are in order of importance when I'm looking at the qualitative data, is having a campus veteran support staff, having that one person that they can go to, that they recognize as being able to connect them with services, to help them with their VA or GI Bill support, having that person on campus. And I think that in Connecticut, I think we've been very good at having that go-to person on all of our campuses that the veterans can go to. Some of the veterans in the survey would actually name the person who was their veteran connection as being very, very important to them. Also, they found, obviously, having the GI Bill support. One of the things that a lot of people don't understand about veterans on campus is they feel like all veterans have 100% reimbursement for their studies, and that's not true. It's based on a lot of different measures. So having that GI Bill support is very helpful, but there's a lot of also other financial needs that veterans have on campus. Having a campus veteran group, so a support group or a network of other vets. So we have a student veteran organization on our campus, and that they have the lounge, the veteran lounge, or the Oasis Center, or whatever you call them on your campuses, where they gather up and they can, feel comfortable, have that sense of safety. They also found that serving in the military really allowed them to have a lot of strengths. And we were joking yesterday in a meeting that we were having about how in the military there's a lot of trainings, a lot of really boring trainings. And so one of the things that you do when you're in a boring training in the military, if you feel like you're falling asleep, is you get up and you stand in the back of the room because you can't fall asleep while you're standing up. And so the veterans were talking about that they were nervous to do that in the classroom because that's not what's done in a classroom in a civilian area, but yet that was their way that they coped. And so we had a discussion whether it's okay to stand up in the back of the classroom, would it make other people nervous? So, but that's a strength that they learned how to deal with, like sleepiness, is by using that experience they had in the military. Having the social support is very important to them, either families or other people on campus. Sometimes the other non-traditional students can be a source of support for them because many of our veterans are between 25 and 35, and they don't necessarily connect well with the 20-year-old that's sitting next to them. But when there's other non-traditional age students, they can find connections there. They also reported that there's been very helpful professors and staff that have been supportive of them. So, whenever there's a problem with one of them has to go to an annual training or they have a long drill weekend, having professors being able to work with them around that. And they also mentioned quite often that it's not their first time going to college, and that many times when we have a veteran walk on our campuses, they've been in other college environments, so they know how it works. So here's some quotes from some of the veterans. So in talking about the veteran support staff, I think the Veterans Center helped make the transition smooth overall. So there's a lot of transitioning that happens when you're going from, particularly when you're in Afghanistan or wherever you are in a deployed situation, to coming home, because you're adjusting to the civilian world, but you're also adjusting to the college world. And if you think about how the military is, it's a very structured environment. It has a very specific hierarchy. And you go to college and they send you to 12 different offices to do, 15 different things. And so it's a big transition for them. And so the Veterans Center understands that on a lot of these campuses and helps them kind of guide them, like, okay, this is the person you need to talk to at the bursar's office, and I'm going to do that for you so you don't have to go over to admissions again. And having that Veterans Affairs office where they can get advice just makes everything so much better for them. So many of them have not only the GI Bill, but they also have other sources that provide them with support through their education. One of them is what they call vocational rehab. So some of them have financial support through GI Bill, through their deployments, through having a disability through their military service, and also they get support through vocational rehab. So just having that economic support, I don't know how familiar you guys all are about the way the GI Bill works, but they get a housing and a living allowance as well, which makes the older veterans who are on the Montgomery, the older 1980s version of the GI Bill, like, oh, hey, no one ever gave me a living allowance. So some of them really are allowed to go to school because they have these kind of supports. So having veteran friends, as we talked about, has really been helpful to the students. Having other veterans that can go, I had that problem, this was, like, they kind of have an informal list of like which professors to take. In our vet lounge, we have a library where if someone finishes an English course, for example, they might leave their books there for the other veterans to use so that they don't have to, buy books if they don't have an allowance for books. But just having that sense of community. Having had discipline in getting things done, whether one wants to or not, in a timeline specified. So this is what the military provides you, that sense of internal structure and that internal sense of discipline. It allows veterans to be very successful in the classroom. They were, in our discussions yesterday, the veterans were talking about working on group projects with other students and how frustrating it was, and we joked about how they get into a team project and they're knife handing all the students, you studied this part and you do research on this. So they have a lot of team building skills, working together skills, and getting stuff done when it's super hard. So where you have a civilian student who may go, well, I didn't sleep last night, so I couldn't come to class, the vet's going to be in class because he or she has had lack of sleep and have had to do difficult things. So having that experience in the military can bring them a lot of assets to the classroom. I like this quote because I think it brings out some of the essence of the military experience for some veterans. Speaking with other veterans and patriots and forming a common bond. So a good deal of people that enter the country and enter the military for this country, they have a patriotic sort of feeling and a devotion to the country and a need to support and defend the country. And sometimes on college campuses, there's not a big feeling of that. And particularly students that are in more liberal universities, they often feel very separate from the way that the group think of a lot of the campuses are. And so having that, like when you walk into our Veterans Lounge, I teach in the social work department, so I feel like I'm in like two completely different environments, because when you walk in the Vets Lounge, like there's language going on there and they're talking about things and their political perspectives are just so different, but they come there together because they have that sense of support from each other, having that understanding that they have similar experiences and other backgrounds. One of the campuses that I worked at, the veterans were concerned because there wasn't any flags. There weren't any United States flags on their campus. They're like, you go around this whole campus, you can't find the United States flag. So that's the kind of thing that veterans look for, to see like how supported they feel. So just having support from other veterans and family members is really important. Good professors that talk and listen about the daily struggle of college life. Being able to talk to a counselor, having people to talk to is really what they talked about with the professor and staff support. One of the things that's a struggle for them is when they get pointed out in the classroom to talk on behalf of the U.S. military, or to be the opposing point of view, because the professors know that they are the opposing point of view. That's tough for them. But having professors understand that they may be, having a difficult time makes it easier for them. And having professors do things like, if you're teaching a political science class, and there's a video being shown that involves war or a discussion about Iraq, or if there's violence that's military related, to like give a heads up to the class, like, this is what we're going to be talking about today. So I have a case study that I do in my class that involves a simulated client talking about his military experiences in Iraq. And before I show the video, I say, this is what's going to be in the video. If it's uncomfortable for people, please feel free to walk out. And I had a student in my class who was an Iraqi citizen who left during the video because it was uncomfortable for her, because she was in the country during the time that this soldier was talking about that. So having that sort of understanding is really important to veterans. This ain't my first rodeo. So a lot of them have had college experiences before, they know how it works, and they really want to take advantage. A lot of our students on campus that are veterans are pushing through really quickly with their education, trying to get it done in 3 years. Some of them are going on to grad school, so they know their way around that. Questions, comments? We got a phone-in question. So let's look at what has been most challenging for them. So being older and different from classmates, this is really a tough thing for a lot of the veteran students, that their life experiences are different because they've been in combat, and also because they're older. A lot of the students that I work with get really frustrated at the lack of maturity in the classroom. I've heard stories of veterans just turning around and jacking a student up against the wall and saying, don't text during class, and like things that perhaps your civilian 20-year-old student won't be thinking about doing is really annoying to a lot of the veterans. And so it's something that professors need to be prepared for, and student affairs officials have to be prepared for, because I hear it on a regular basis, and it's something that really affects them. The lack of maturity and the lack of respect. So I have a student veteran who works in my office, and we're in social work, so all the students call us by our first names and not our doctor names. And so it really rubs her the wrong way, because she comes from a place where you use people's titles and they've earned them and you give them that respect. And so it's little things like that. And sometimes they get frustrated at the professors, so that if I'm running a classroom and there's somebody talking in the back of the room and I ignore that, the veterans oftentimes will get annoyed at the professor for not controlling the classroom. And they feel like they have to do it because the professor's not doing it. So it puts them in an uncomfortable situation. Sometimes civilian students are nervous or scared about veterans. They think they're dangerous. They think they all have PTSD. So they have that kind of stigma that they have to worry about. And sometimes veterans will either not identify themselves or isolate themselves just to not have to deal with any of that kind of stuff. College is very, very different from military life. So when you are in the military, your life is extremely structured and oftentimes structured by somebody else. And when you go to college, there's a sudden freedom. There's so much extra time. And it's anxiety producing to go from one cultural structure to another. And this one is so different that it does create a lot of difficulty for some of the students, just not knowing like how to go about the daily sort of ambiguity of a college campus. It's challenging. And stress is sometimes an issue for veterans in that when they come, sometimes they feel like they're not really prepared for the classroom. They haven't had classroom experiences where they've had to think in like abstract ways about topics that they haven't been had in front of them. Sometimes they haven't done math in 10 years. They're behind. They feel like they're behind. They feel like they're behind in their writing skills. Sometimes they're behind in their technology skills. So that can be stressful. So this one student said that they're not current on Skype and Google where people can work on the same document at the same time. So it's like simple things like that. So they have like a great deal of pride as being an older student and having accomplished so much, and then they get struck by having to deal with technology that they're not comfortable with, and that puts them in an uncomfortable situation. And then they're all grown-ups by the time they come to us, and so they have that balancing issue, the work-life balance. So they have kids, and they have a job, and they have responsibilities, and a lot of them will still be in the Guard or Reserve, so they'll have duties that are related to the military. So just keeping up all those grown-up responsibilities is a challenge for many of them. And then some of them really have trouble finding support, not having many other veterans to relate to, having to deal with other students and teachers who have no idea what military life is like or what veterans have experienced. So that sense of feeling isolated and alienated, and I know that that's something that a lot of campuses are really working hard to try to alleviate in the veterans. And then, as we saw from the research, there's a significant number of veterans that are dealing with PTSD and depression and other issues. So there's a lot of issues that happen just specifically in the classroom that a lot of professors and other staff don't know about. So if you are a combat veteran and you were to walk in this classroom, you would have to figure out, this is a hard classroom because oftentimes veterans like to sit in the back because they can watch everybody. If they were taught during their deployment to be tactically aware of everything around them for their own safety, when they walk into a room like this, if this was filled with people, that would be, for them, every person in this room is a potential hazard for them. So they want to sit in the back of the room where they can scan. But the other issue is having the door, and that veterans like to have a lot of awareness of where the door is so that they could leave if they need to. And so because this classroom is set up where the door is in the front, they want to sit in the back, this would be a tough call for veterans of where to sit. And we had this long talk the other day about where do you sit in a movie theater. And so they all agreed, because the movie theater is similar in that the doors are in the front. So they sit in the third row because you have the human shield in front of you. I'm not kidding you, this is how some of them think. And you have access to the door. And if you're sitting on the side, you can still kind of scan the room around you. So having that tactical awareness stays with veterans that have been deployed. And it slowly gets better and better as they spend time, but there's a lot of things that can happen in their heads when you have PTSD that even impact them in the classroom. So that I have my office is below a classroom where every day they move chairs around. And that always startles the veteran that works in my office, because she'll just be working away and all of a sudden, that sound of the chairs moving around is startling to her. And so if there's loud noises, if there's doors banging, things like that, that's going to bring their hypervigilance up, and they're going to be very aware of what's happening. And then their anxiety, because now their hypervigilance has been startled, is going to keep them from having a learning experience in that classroom. So, having the isolation and the issues with anxiety and depression and PTSD makes school very, very challenging for students. Okay, this is researchy stuff that we don't really have to talk about, but this is the nice, clean way of looking at it. So these are the basic topics that I have in my measure that I use to measure adjustment to college. And basically, through this very complicated factor analysis, it turns out that there's 3 things that my measure looks at. The first one is having that sense of belonging. So having people make assumptions about their military experience. A lot of times veterans, I don't think not so much now, but in previous years, people would say, oh, you're a veteran, did you kill somebody? And that's a really uncomfortable question for veterans to get. And so people make assumptions about what their military experience was like without actually knowing it, and they say very offensive things to them. Having someone on campus who understands them. So that's really connected to feeling like they belong. So some of these are negatively connected to belonging, some of them are positively. So the immaturity of classmates makes them feel like they don't belong, because if they're in a sea of 19, 20-year-old kids, they're not feeling like they belong. Not fitting in on campus, having non-veteran friends. The students that have non-veteran friends are making that effort to make connections outside the veteran community. The second factor is college stress. Balancing work and life and school responsibilities. Being prepared to handle the workload of college, because the military has given them that preparation. Just struggling with the adjustments and how prepared the military has prepared them. That is connected to having college stress. And the last one is support. Having someone on campus who understands them. And I think a lot of the misconception is that you have to be a veteran in order to connect with a veteran. But it's really like when I'm not a veteran myself, and when our veteran service official got deployed for a year, I had to kind of take a little bit of his job by overseeing the Student Veteran Association. And when he came back, they were like, we want you to stay. So you don't have to be a veteran in order to make that connection. You have to be someone who understands, and you don't have to, they talk about these things and I'm like, can you explain to me what that acronym means? But for the most part, having an understanding of military culture, having an understanding that their experiences are different really goes a long way. So having someone understand, I have to go away for annual training. It's not an option. I have to go. How can you work with me on that? Having someone on campus to talk to, having support during the transition, and receiving time management or study skills. Those things are all connected to having that sense of support on campus. So what this slide is talking about is that my quantitative measure that has 13 items that measures the adjustment to college was very connected to what the veterans were talking about in the qualitative questions, which made me go, yay, because it's about support and belonging and stress. And this is also about support, school stressors, mental health issues. So those things that are in the quantitative measure, that's what the student veterans were talking about when I asked them the qualitative questions. So I was pretty excited. So how do you use the scale on your campus? All of you have a listserv of veterans on your campus. You can send it electronically, offer a raffle incentive. I had a iPad mini for the incentive for my research, and literally, I'd see a veteran on campus, I really want that iPad mini. It was very good incentive for people to fill out the survey, so that was helpful. You can leave the survey in your college lounge and have them submitted into a box. It's anonymous. When they come in for recertification, you can give them the survey and then have them leave it with you. And so by gathering that data, you could use it for various different ways on your campus. So this is just how you score. If you wanted to use it, you can look at the cutoff score of 44. So anyone higher, they might be having trouble. We need to look at that. Or, I'm sorry, lower than 44. It's a positive scale. And also, there's very specific questions. So if you're wondering if your students are not getting a lot of support on your campus, you can look specifically at that question. Like, look, it doesn't seem like the veterans are feeling support here. We maybe need to hire somebody that can work on that issue, or maybe we need to make a connection with the vet center that will help us, connect better to the veterans and what their needs are. So I have some nice quotes that I really enjoyed using or reading, and I think they really kind of speak to the culmination of all the work. Coming to terms with the loss of a common community. So you think about the military, when you're in the military, that's a common community. And remaking one from a wider assortment of service members. So they go into the vet lounge, and now they're friends with someone who's a Coast Guard person, and now they're friends with someone who's a Ranger. And so they figure out how to sew together another unit, because that unit support was very important to them when they were in the military. Getting used to being in classes with students who have little respect and teachers who do not have the backbone to run the class and handle students. So, right, I know, that's like, woo! Well, I know they weren't holding back, that's for sure. Sometimes I feel out of place, especially in social situations. I occasionally get the feeling people are intimidated by me, and I hear that a lot. First-year students have the hardest time. We need to show them who they can talk to, and it's okay to talk to them. So we had a student who was new to our university come in to our first Thursday yesterday, and he just kind of came in. He came in late. It was our first connection that any of us ever had with him. And so when he's there, I'm like, here is the head of the student veteran organization. This is our veterans official. Getting him connected to the veterans community on campus is going to help him have more success on our campus. I like this one too. Getting the dumbass chip off your shoulder where you think you're better than someone who didn't serve. And so I do this with military audiences because I think they all chuckle to it. And that sometimes veterans want to separate themselves and have that kind of like sense of importance because of what they've done. And sometimes if you're too important, you're not spending time connecting and listening. And I think this veteran really wanted to talk about that. Okay, questions, comments?